All right, well, thank you for joining us here on News 12's Facebook page. We are live tonight. This is a discussion about the unrest in America. It's a community conversation. Basically, the goal tonight is to be able to talk about all the issues that are taking place really across the country and here on Long Island as well. Hopefully, we have an open dialogue. We won't solve all of the world's problems, but maybe we can make some progress. So we have a great panel for you here tonight. We've got Nassau County Police Commissioner Patrick Ryder, good enough to join us. Commissioner, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We also have Dan Lloyd. He is the founder of Minority Millennials. He's also been very active with some of the protests that have been taking place in terms of organizing that. Dan, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, it's a pleasure to join. Thank you for having me.
The Suffolk County Sheriff Errol Toulon also joining us tonight. Thank you, Sheriff.
Thanks, Rich. Looking forward to it.
Suffolk County Legislator Richberg as well. Legislator, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Rich, and thank you to News 12 for having this discussion.
Sure. And the Suffolk County PBA President, Noel DiGerolamo, is here as well. Thank you so much for being here, Noel.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, all the panel members. Happy to be here.
All right, so here's how it works. We're going to have a conversation. We also want to take your questions. So if you have something to ask these folks, you send us a question, and then we will try to get it answered for you. Now, we are going to start with the latest news, and we're talking about the president's executive order just signed today. Now, the measure creates a database to track excessive force complaints. It also bans chokeholds, except if it's a life-threatening situation for the officer. Dan, I want to start with you. What's your reaction to the president's executive order today?
I think it's a step in a positive direction, but I think there definitely needs to be more added to that. We need, one of the biggest outcries right now is having more transparency in the policing matters and, you know, the civil cases that are going on. And not only that, but the repealing of 58, and this kind of coincides with that. And so it gives us more access to what's really going on and how we can make sure that police officers that have a number of civil complaints are being held accountable.
Noel, several of the national police unions were represented at the president's executive order signing today. What's your reaction to what was put on paper?
Well, you know, I don't think anybody disputes that there is room for certain reforms with regard to policing in the country. And I think that at least the president and the federal government took a step in the right direction by contemplating other uses of force when they ban the chokehold. It's a shame that our state government didn't do the same. They just did a universal ban, did not take into consideration the possibility that there may be a deadly physical force situation where the officer would have to defend themselves rather than using a firearm. They didn't take into consideration multiple assailants. They didn't take into consideration an individual possibly using deadly physical force against a third party and the officer using that instead of more lethal force. So, you know, I think that the state ill-conceived with a lot of the things that they did, weren't properly vetted, and hopefully as we move forward, there'll be greater dialogue with all parties involved so that we could do this the right way and not politicize it.
Commissioner, how does this change things in terms of what you tell officers? Just today, you graduated a new class.
Yeah, so we banned the chokehold 5 years ago. When you say we banned it, I agree with Noel. There are circumstances when you're in the fight for your life, it's deadly physical force being used against you. Any means of force that you can use at that point should be justified. So you can't just paint it with the broad brush. When you talk about the system about flagging complaints in a database, we already do that. And I'm pretty sure Suffolk does it the same. You know, you start with a complaint, it goes to what's called a blue team. And then from the blue team, it goes to internal affairs. And if you get 2 to 3 complaints on a certain item, you get brought in, you're re-interviewed, you're retrained, trying to refocus and again, repurpose the officer. So a lot of these things, they are getting a little bit politicized, but it's good for the public to see what we do. And it's good to see some of the reform, just as Noel just said. Some reform, we all know was coming, just like when we did justice reform at the beginning of the year, bail reform and discovery. All those things were important. It had to be done, but at what scale and at what cost? And so I think the conversation, when we always say we want to sit down and have the conversations are not being had when it comes to reform against law enforcement. That's painful to the law enforcement side because of the act of Minneapolis is not the act of the officers here on Long Island. And now we have to sit back and We have to look and review and again, work with our community to make sure we can do it better.
Sheriff, what is your reaction to the president's executive order?
Well, as everybody stated, these reforms were very much needed, and also I think it's a step in the right direction. You know, when I look at things, when you look at why law enforcement organizations fail, it's usually due to training or supervision. And so I'm hoping that there's some teeth to this, where there's actually some retraining of staff, and we're also emphasizing supervision of those staff, because generally that's what happens. I believe that the officer in question in Minneapolis was a field training officer. You know, there were two people there. Two of those officers or former officers had 3 and 5 days on the job. You know, they probably weren't trained, and they were probably a little frightened. They are new to this culture, and now, unfortunately, a few weeks prior, they were in the academy, and now they're in jail. So, you know, I do think we need to retrain. We need to emphasize better supervision on all law enforcement throughout our country.
Legislator, you have a president who has proclaimed himself the law and order president, and yet today he did sign these reforms. Do you think it's a step in the right direction?
I think, as was stated before by almost everybody on the panel, I think it is a step in the right direction. I would have liked to see, you know, something similar to what the sheriff was talking about. You know, more training and, you know, more things that we can say this is the next steps to move forward. But also, I would like to see more people at the table. I think we need to bring more people to the table, because with inclusion comes good policy. I don't want to see just an executive order. I want to see, you know, everybody have input into what's going on.
We have seen people across the country take to the streets for more than 2 weeks now, and clearly there has been momentum built up because we are seeing changes at both the federal and the state level. Dan, I want to start with you again on this, because you have been involved in organizing some of the demonstrations on Long Island. Did you anticipate that the momentum would continue to carry through here 2 weeks plus and counting?
No, I'd be lying if I said that, but I think around like the 4th or 5th day, we quickly realized that this was not going away, and that this was going to be a special moment with regards to making sure there's transformative change, but not just within police reform, but addressing systematic racism in America, and how that has really created such a divide in the underbelly of people's mindsets and the injustices that happen. And so we're super excited that it's still going, and I think it needs to continue until we really get to more changes and more reforms. And one of the big things is defunding the police department, which I think the wording is really bad with that. But you know, what a lot of people are crying out for is police reinvesting into the communities. And I think that needs to be the next step. And that's what these marches and protests are going towards now.
Well, I want to take a question on that from one of our viewers, because you just mentioned the defund movement. Angela Draper is asking, why do you think defunding the police will work before you put the other solutions in place? She's not asking you specifically, Dan, but just in general. She's saying before you defund anything, let's put in some of these other measures. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think what you see in a lot of underserved communities is people dealing with trauma, decades and decades of trauma and systematic racism. And so there's a lot of mental health issues that are going on. And it's not just violence. There is this narrative with regards to policing, specifically in Black communities, that you're defending communities away from violent people. And that's what leads to police brutality and to the issues that we're seeing. And so if you can take big police budgets, I mean, Nassau and Suffolk are well over $500 million in budgets, and take some of that and reinvest that into housing, into access to healthcare, into education, into mental health services, that would help the police department better serve the community in a way that is meant to be.
Commissioner Ryder, I've covered some of the budget shortfalls in recent years, at least in Nassau County, as it relates to the police department and retaining officers and detectives and that type of thing. What would any kind of defunding movement mean for the Nassau County Police Department?
So when you look, we've already, in the last 3 years, our budget has actually declined in law enforcement, trying to keep our head count to where we have to be, which is budgeted. Majority of this is contractual salaried employees. We have a small piece of that that then goes into our public. So when you talk about when you defund, you take some of the money from and reassign it, it's going to come out of community affairs, problem-oriented policing, our bicycle cops, all the things that were built on community, that's what we're going to lose. So that's not the best way to do it. I think this is the time, and you heard it from the sheriff a moment ago, this is a time where we need to reinvest in law enforcement, not from the physical presence of a cop, but in the presence of community, to bring it into neighborhood policing, bring it back into that community affairs officers, that liaison, that outreach, all of the things that it was in the governor's plan that he laid out. A lot of those things we already do, and that's the things that we would lose if we took that funding out from law enforcement.
Legislator Richberg, I know the county executive has said he does not believe in defunding the police department in Suffolk County. The legislature controls the purse strings. What say you about this?
So I think, Stacey Abrams said it best. I think we should be looking at reimagining and then transformation. I think we should be reimagining how we're doing it. And I think that's what Commissioner Ryder was talking about. Investing in community-based approaches to affecting crime or stopping crime. We should also be looking at, investing in our PAL system, our crime victim services. A lot of things come out of the police budget that folks don't know. And I also think, and I've said this many times, that government does a bad job of telling people what we do. We just sort of put our police documents out there or our budgets out there and say, oh, well, this is our budget. We don't really explain what happens. But in the transformation piece, it's also transforming how we explain what goes on. So we need to reimagine and then transform and figure out what the community needs best. And that's where community policing works at its best, is when we work with the community.
Sheriff, is there a way to make that work? Or maybe it's not necessarily defunding, but it's reimagining law enforcement in a way that better serves the community?
Yes, I agree 100%, Rich, and I'll tell you why. We started a program called Deconstructing the Prison Pipeline, where members of the sheriff's office, where members of the community are actually researching, understanding, and talking to individuals to understand the adverse childhood effects that cause an individual to have criminogenic behavior. And so when we start to look at a child that was abused as a young child, or when you see different things that have occurred in their lifetime as they've grown up into young adulthood and then start to commit crimes or have aberrant behavior, we start to understand why these things are occurring. And when you talk about poor education, healthcare, housing, these are all social issues. And unfortunately, when these things start to collapse, it then winds up in the hands of the police department. And now, unfortunately, we have to solve the problems by arresting someone, incarcerating them, and now our jails are full.
Okay, we have Noel back with us now. Noel, can you hear us?
Yeah, my apologies. The computer is rebooting. As soon as I could get the better one up, I will be back on that one.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
I unfortunately ticked out when you were talking about defunding.
Yeah, so we're still there, and I want to get your reaction to that. What would it mean for the rank and file members of the police department?
Well, when people speak about defunding, I don't think they're using the appropriate terminology on it, because it's not removing funds, all funds. I think what people are talking about is they have this conception of moving certain funds, and that again it's not the appropriate way to go. And in fact, I believe it should be the exact opposite. What you need to do is add funding. You need to add funding to the police department that they can do more community-based programs that have a partnership with the community in which they're serving. You want to have them more involved. You want to have more of the activities that the Suffolk County Police Department does. For instance, we have programs in place like a Citizens Academy, where individuals are able to come into the police department. They go through a citizens version of our police academy. We explain to them the roles that police officers have. And it really does help bridge a lot of misconceptions with law enforcement and the community. We have a myriad of programs, whether it be the school resource officers, whether it be the coffee with a cop, where they go and they meet at a diner or a restaurant and they'll sit for an hour or so and everybody has open dialogue about issues surrounding the community and how the police department is responding to them. We have a deputy police commissioner who is focused on recidivism and community-based relations. So we have a lot of programs in place, and I think what you need to do is further fund those, bring the community in to have a greater participation with the police department, and let their voice be heard in that way. Removing funds from the police department would only further, cause problems within the lower income communities. If you don't have appropriate resources to respond to the core mission, then when those 911 calls come in, those are the people who are going to get a reduction of the service that they are accustomed to, and frankly, they deserve, and more. So I think it's the exact opposite what we should be talking about, how to bridge the gap by bringing everybody together, not removing and losing law enforcement. You need to have a partnership with the community. That's the only way it's going to work.
Dan, what do you say to that?
We definitely need a partnership, and that partnership starts with trust, and there's a lack of trust across the board. I mean, we have a great working relationship with the Suffolk County Police Department and the Deputy Police Commissioner, and as well as the Sheriff, and we've had open communication, but that's not for every single community, and there needs to be a rebuilding of trust, and that starts with investment into the community. I'm not sure how putting more investment into the police department would better serve if there's no internal investment into a community like a Brentwood or a Wyandanch or in Hempstead. I mean, again, the housing departments and the social services, the budgets within Nassau and Suffolk are nowhere near to that of the police departments. And that's a direct correlation of what we're seeing here. And I think that, again, we need more investment into the communities internally, not put more budgets into the police department. I think that's going backwards. And we need drastic change. And so it's not just reform, it's literally reinvesting millions of dollars into people that desperately need it right now, and not just the police department.
Okay, we have another question from one of our viewers on Facebook. Roberto Nowak asks, do any of the panelists believe that the media fuels the fire of racism in this country? So the broader issue of race, is it that we're seeing it nonstop? We're seeing these things take place across media, across social media. Legislator, let's start with you on that
one. I would say that there is some sensationalism, but I would also say that, it's not like it's not happening. I mean, to say that there isn't racism in the world, you would be blind. I mean, I'm sure that, every one of us, Dan, Errol, can definitely speak to a point in time in their life where they were either a victim of racism or seen racism. So I think what happens is now we're able to see it because everybody has a camera, right? And it's not just in terms of law enforcement, it's people calling the police on someone because they believe they're an aggressive person or they feel uncomfortable or something of that nature. I think we're capturing it on camera and now it's being put on Front Street. And I think, people forget that we all have cameras and that we all have to be accountable for our actions. And I'm not just talking about law enforcement, I mean the general populace. You can't just make comments that are insensitive or derogatory or racist in some way, shape, or form and not be held accountable.
Sheriff, if we were not in our current state with cell phones, it's possible the general public may never have known the name George Floyd. The cell phone video tells a story, and then that video is sent across the country, and obviously a huge reaction. How has things changed in that regard in terms of law enforcement and the availability of cameras, cell phone videos, et cetera?
I think with the advent of the cell phone, when you talk about, even Rodney King, his was taken with that, one of those old handhelds. We're now able to actually hold not only people accountable, but we're able to see all the actions that are led. And, in some cases, even with cell phone cameras, we're able to exonerate officers that have had allegations against them. So, unfortunately, we're seeing the worst of the worst. We're seeing, very bad actions by law enforcement. But on the other side, we do see times when law enforcement has been actually vindicated, with the use of a cell phone because someone has actually made an allegation against an officer. And now if there's no body cams, at least now there's some way to actually piece all the allegations together for an investigation. So, unfortunately, with the media, depending on what channel you watch, which way they want to flip the way a video is seen is unfortunate. But, that's just the way we are in our society. And with social media, it's going to go quickly. And whatever the words and whatever that small 15 seconds is going to show, that's what people are going to believe.
Commissioner, it seems we see two types of cell phone videos with police, either something horrendous taking place or something amazing taking place, an officer interacting with the community and maybe a child. We don't see the everyday, so to say, mundane tasks of being a police officer, and yet that's the job, right, for 99% of the officers out there?
You know, because of social media, there's no integrity with that social media. You know, somebody can take it, they can hijack it, they can doctor it up, send it back out, cut out a piece, put a little piece in, and it fires and fuels our community. And does it fuel racism on both sides? Absolutely, absolutely. And I've seen it. We've had our protests where peaceful protests, that we just had one from Centennial Park to the 1st Precinct. We met the organizer, spoke with the organizer, gave us the route. Here's what we're going to do. No issues. Somebody grabbed one of the flyers from that protest and they put a lot of other stuff on it to fire it up. And the organizer said, no, that's not me. This is my flyer. So we lose control with social media. We've lost control with social media, I should say. There is no integrity. Like with the media, we could call Rich up and say, hey, Rich, that's not the true story. Here's what that is. So it has a problem. And yes, we see always the bad. The bad sells, right? The good, not so much. But we're starting to see a lot more of good postings with law enforcement. We have our officers out doing a lot of these marches where they're interacting with the group and they're getting positive interaction in this. They're thanking them at the end of the interaction. We had our officer that went viral that was giving hugs out, and everybody went out and got a hug from the officer. And, you know, I was walking with that officer the next day. I go, hey, wait, you're the cop that was giving out the hugs, right? And he says, yeah, boss, you want a hug? I said, no, not now. So, it was the good of something. And there was good in a lot of these. I've been at and marched with several of these marches, more than I've ever wanted to walk in my life. But at the end of the day, you're meeting real people with real problems, and they're voicing them to us. And then when they look at us and you say, hey, but we're not the problem from what's being painted with law enforcement. We're not what happened in Minneapolis. We're not. We have problems. Everybody has problems. Every agency in this country has a problem that they can better themselves. We took some of our programs. I sat with our county exec the other day, and I said, we do mostly what the governor is asking for, but we can always do better. We can always do better because our public deserves better. And that is part of what the relationship and the trust comes. And when you talk this, like Dan, just listening to him, having that relationship with the Suffolk County Police Department, and have that is important, that we can get our messages out through our community leaders that are out there working for the community.
Dan, does the polarization on social media make it more difficult sometimes to win over hearts and minds to the cause, the reason that you're demonstrating?
No, I don't think it's a polarization, to be quite honest with you. I mean, America foundationally was built off of racism and slavery. So this is an issue, again, that's a systematic problem for close to 500 years now. And so what we're seeing in the past few decades is just visual outrage about that this has actually happened. I mean, we got to remember that a man died under a police officer's knee, and the people were recording it and watching it, and that's the outrage. And so I think that it's just not right to call it a polarization when you see the hatred and the vileness that comes from protests and marches, like the situation in Merrick and in Smithtown. I mean, I just saw a video where there were officers next to people using the N-word, and there was nothing done about that. And so I think we have to take a closer look at what are hate crimes, you know, what is racism, and how are we going to continue to allow this without having any type of repercussions for civilians as well. That's part of the problem. And so I don't think it's a polarization. I think it exists, and we're exposing it, and we're not going to continue to allow it. I think the marches will continue unless people really just address this issue and not allow it to move forward.
I'm not talking about polarization in terms of what you're demonstrating about. I'm talking about, we live in a hyper-partisan, your team versus my team kind of society right now, politically, socially. What I'm asking you is, in that setting, is it more difficult to get your point across, or do you think you are able now to bridge some gaps?
We are bridging gaps. I mean, things are changing, reforms are happening, policies are changing, and so I think it's benefiting moving forward and making sure that there is rest within the country and we're addressing racial issues. So no, I don't think it's a negative thing. I think it's a positive thing.
Noel, the governor has said that state police will wear body cameras now. They'll be mandated to wear body cameras. What is your thoughts on that?
Well, we already have some body cameras in the Suffolk County Police Department, and we've negotiated that in the past to bring them in prior to all of this happening. In fact, we have the availability for them to do so moving forward, and we're always willing to work with the police department in order to see anything they want to occur. We'll work with them to see that happen. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is the significant investment into body cameras, not for the actual camera itself, but the extensive storage that you need to maintain. And video takes up a lot of storage, and you need to keep it. And the funding for that starts to become just untenable for the municipality with regard to budgeting. So, absent the state or the federal government giving funds to offset those costs, I just don't see, especially given right now what we've gone through with the COVID crisis, I don't see the funding there to do this. You're talking about tens of millions of dollars added into the budget to do that. The good thing about body cameras was that they would not be selective in nature like the cell phones are. As the sheriff said, you turn on one channel of the news, depends on which one you're watching, depends on the angle you're going to see or what's being left out. Police officers deal with everything from marriage counseling to murder, and that could one turns to the other in a split second. And if you want to cut out the first half of the video, well, you're not going to see one part of it, or you're not going to see the other. So cell phones, as any other recording device, is really subjective to the integrity of the person taking it. So absent it being a 24-hour operation on every officer around the clock that's working, that passes one to the other, it's going to take a tremendous amount of resources. I don't know that we're in a position to do it right now. I don't know that any municipality is really. My understanding is that the state had that in their budget for the last several years, and they never implemented because they simply could not afford to do it. So that's one of the big hurdles that we're facing right now is economics. Will the money be there to do it, and where will it come from?
We have a good question from Najee Simmons. And the question is, what role do you believe a given community should have in determining the way that it is policed? Commissioner Ryder.
I think all community engagement is important. And we just started the PAC today, the county exec, police and community trust. And the idea of it is to bring the young adults. And that's what, sometimes we can't relate as a 58-year-old white guy relating to something of in a African-American community of 25-year-olds. And when you watch the marchers and it is a movement, and you see these 25-year-old kids, black, white, brown, male, female, lesbian, gay, it didn't matter. They're all there and they're all marching together. So we have to listen to their voices. We have to listen to what they say. You can always learn by listening. If you don't listen, you're ignorant. And so we should sit down and have those conversations. But yeah, I think it was before something with some teeth, and it was said, it's whatever we come out of this, these kids are not dumb by any means, and they know what they want, and they want substance and they want return. Now, it shouldn't be how we learn to police, but there are ideas that we can learn to police better. And, so I think the engagement and them sitting down and having these conversations is very important.
In terms of the community having a say in the way in which it's policed.
Yeah, I agree. It's incredibly important. I think we should have a citizen insight committee that really looks at citizen complaints, and we're able to really hold accountable to making sure that those officers that have a history of being violent are held accountable and are reprimanded. And most importantly, maybe even being removed from their job title and their position. So I think having the citizen insight community gives some type of investment from the community, and more importantly, that builds trust, which is desperately needed in an ongoing and relationship moving forward.
Legislator, from a lawmaker's perspective, what role can government play in ensuring that different communities have a role in how they're policed?
Well, I think it starts with what some of my colleagues have said already. It's communication. I think we all need to communicate better. I think a lot of times, and we had talked before we had started it, a lot of times we talk at each other and not talking with each other. And I think creating methods, talking to your elected official, talking to the first precinct. Our, Suffolk County, we have precinct meetings, once a month. You can go down and have a conversation with the inspector of your precinct. Reaching out to your elected official. I've been at events, I've been at rallies. In fact, I was at one at Dan's, and a number of people came to me and had conversations with me about what they feel should be done differently. So I think we need to make sure that, one, folks, that government is open. Maybe, COVID is a little bit different, but they can always come down to the Public Safety Committee. They could always reach out to the legislator. They could always reach out to the precinct and have those conversations. But we also need, in the governor's executive order, it says that we have to have community investment moving forward. And I think that's what we're trying to do. I think we're trying to figure out a methodical approach to put together these panels to make sure that we have community investment and community input.
Sheriff, how can it work from your perspective?
Well, since I've taken office, I've been in 1 to 2 schools per week talking to students about various issues that they're confronted with, whether it's bullying, vaping, opioids, or gangs. And then it leads into that trust with their lack of trust with law enforcement communities. And so I have myself and my staff going out and talking, interacting with the youth, especially those that are in high school. As I said to you earlier, we're trying to deconstruct the prison pipeline by understanding some of the adverse childhood effects that are going on with many of these young men and women, whether it's lack of supervision, parents are working multiple jobs, not home, so they're not able to, it's not that same type of family environment we may have seen 30 or 40 years ago because of the economy. And now with COVID, with many people losing their jobs, we've had individuals that are not working, individuals who are not in school, that may not be part of the protests if they were employed or if they were in school. But now it became that big storm where everything came together, and also you got to remember with George Floyd, just a few weeks earlier, we had Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. And then we had the woman in Central Park, Amy Cooper, that, called the police, 911 on a black man threatening her. And clearly he was videotaping her. And so, within a few weeks, you see these 3 incidents occur, clearly racist. And this is what led us to where we're at. So from my perspective, it's really just trying to get out to the community, talk to as many people as possible, help them to understand actually what the sheriff's office does, because a lot of people are confused with the roles and responsibilities in Suffolk County.
Noel, in this day and age, do many people in communities know the officers who are working in the precincts that represent them? Do they get that kind of sense that maybe was there some years ago and not now, or do you think it still exists?
And I appreciate what Dan said earlier about the working relationship with the Suffolk County Police Department. We really do have an excellent community outreach in our department. And I'd say probably in the early to mid 90s, there was a influx of resources from the federal government to create community-oriented policing programs so that we could bridge that gap a little more. And we've assigned specific officers to it. And then time after time, you put the right officers in the right place. And there are a good amount of officers that are known by their first name in the sectors and the communities in which they patrol. And that's a testament to that officer and that community. So they work together collectively. And I have officers that will tell me right now, listen, there's something happened one day, they're there on an incident that happened, and the next day they're helping the person change a flat tire. That happens all the time. And I think that for the most part here, our community and our police department do work together in that fashion, and there is a sense of being together and working toward the common goal. It's the unfortunate minority. When I say minority, I mean group of people, the less amount, that like to spread the vitriol to cause the divide. And, that could be white, black, Hispanic, Asian, doesn't matter who they are. Some people just enjoy causing that divide and seeing what happens. And that doesn't serve our society. What serves us best is to have the open dialogue, the communication, and move forward in a way that's going to work for everybody.
Legislator, young people and children are watching what's happening across the country. How would you talk to some of your younger constituents about what's taking place right now?
So we have here, since my predecessor, Dwayne Gregory, we started a youth caucus 10 years ago. And so it's a group of young people who meet once, sometimes twice a month, sometimes once a month, and they have discussions. And we've had a conversation, a real conversation about this, about, some folks were disappointed in their friends and family for not taking part. Some folks were, they were confused. And I think what's most important is that we should watch and listen. A wise person said to me, it's important to have discussions, to talk about what's going on, and to be honest with your children. My father, talked to me about what was going on when he was in Vietnam and when he, during the 60s and 70s, so I could understand my past. As a kid, we would go to plantations and Civil War battle sites so we can understand why we got to where we are right now. And when we have our conversation, with our youth caucus, it's an open and frank conversation. And some of them are scared. I've had conversations with folks on this chat, saying, so I have young people who are scared, I have young people who are excited, and I have young people who are just in the middle and don't know how to feel. And I think it's important to say to them and to the parents at home listening, it's okay. However you're feeling at this moment in time, it's okay. But you need to explore those feelings and have those conversations, and understand the other person's perspective. Because a lot of times we don't do that.
Sheriff, do you think there's a teachable moment to be had here for younger people?
Yes, first of all, they're very empowered right now. So they realize the power of their voice, which is something that most people don't experience at a young age. I do think now that the youth and young people of America now should engage with their law enforcement communities. I've worked with Commissioner Ryder, I've worked with Commissioner Hart, and I can tell you, we work collectively to really work hard to try and make our communities better, and also understand the roles and the things that we're faced with collectively. We're still husbands and wives and fathers and sons, and we have our own human instincts also. But I do think when we communicate with our young adults and also young children, they see the human side of law enforcement, and also they have a better appreciation of the roles and responsibilities that the men and women that are on the streets every single day have to carry out.
Dan, do you see a lot more younger people now starting to ask questions and maybe reaching out to you about what's happening?
Certainly. I mean, definitely asking questions and also demanding change. I would also say that younger people, so let's say, as early as 5 years old to about 12, a majority are scared of police right now, unfortunately. And so there's a lot of those conversations happening. I mean, I had a nephew that came to our march, and it was a very peaceful march. We worked hand in hand with the first precinct, who was incredible, but he was scared. He was afraid as to what might happen. And that is a sentiment that's happening. And I think that, again, that's why we have to continue to put in preventive measures that reimagine what public safety looks like. We have to change that idea that policing is this idea of, protecting the community from violent people, or that the narrative that minority communities are violent, and that all comes with this preventive work.
Commissioner, we've seen a lot of young people at many of the demonstrations, as Dan said, as young as 5, 6 years old, people bringing their kids because they want them to absorb this moment and to see what's taking place. How do you reach some of those younger people in terms of trying to reassure them that the police are not to be feared?
I think you're seeing that when we're out there and we're walking. Like I said to you, I've been out there and I've walked in the rain, in the sweat, and everything else alongside of these kids. And I see the ones that are very angry, and I see the other ones I could talk to. The other day from the Centennial March, a mom, as I'm coming up to the corner in front of the group, a mom says, "Excuse me, officer, can my daughter give you a bottle of water?" I said, "Of course she can." I bent down, she hands me a bottle of water, and little 3-year-old girl puts her fist up to me and gives me a fist bump. She goes, "Black Lives Matter." I mean, the kids know nothing but innocence in her life, please God. And she's already got a message now. And so there's a learning, you said it earlier, that teaching moment, that learning. There's a lesson for all of us to be learning this. I mean, not just the young, and us as elder people in our society, we should be learning too what's going on there. Like our young kids, they really are a great group that they don't recognize, race or religion. They just recognize the friend in front of them. And, when my kids come home and all different walks of life come through the door, And, you're like, wow, it's great that they can work together and not look at anything, and nobody's any different. So again, there's lessons to be learned for all of us in this. This has been an emotional ride between COVID and then right into this, where you're seeing such a change in our world and our society. I think, but when we talk about this, we must remember something, that cops signed up to protect and serve you. And, we got mistakes. We need to do better. But the 99.9% of these men and women that are doing it put their life on the line for everybody. And now we're getting painted with the broad brush that we're the bad. We're all bad, and we're all, if you listen to some of the chants that are out there. But again, they're angry. They're angry right now, and they want to get their message out there. It's a little clouded, but it's clear on one side of it that what they're angry about.
Joining us now is Dr. Lorna Lewis. She is the superintendent from the Plainview-Old Bethpage School District on a busy night because it is school vote night.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. I want to throw you right in here. We're talking about speaking to children about everything that's taking place across the country. They're seeing the images, maybe they don't quite understand them. How would you recommend that we talk to our children about what's happening?
Well, I think at each grade level, it will be different. So we have actually provided resources to our social workers, through our social workers and psychologists and our parents on the different types of resources. It's very important that we don't deny what's going on, but we find an appropriate way to explain to our children that there are people who will hurt other people, who are working outside of what is expected. I don't think we should sugarcoat it. What happened in Minnesota is unacceptable, and this is not the way we treat people. That we are human beings, and human beings need to be human, and they need to care about each other. So we, from kindergarten all the way through, at the secondary level, we talk to them about looking at social media and deciphering what is real news from fake news, understanding how to look at resources to delve deeper. So for example, in this week, our president gave us the gift of scheduling Tulsa on Juneteenth. Most white Americans knew nothing about Juneteenth. It was an opportunity for us to speak to our children about what happened in Juneteenth from grades 7 through 12. We have infused that in our English and social studies curriculum. So when things happen in our society, it gives us an opportunity to explore our curriculum and get them to understand deeply. Tulsa, again, was a site of a vicious attack on Black people back earlier, and people knew nothing about a Black Wall Street. So when things like this happen in our news, we get an opportunity to explain to our children what really happened, what was real news versus fake news.
Dr. Lewis, if these were normal times, you would have a classroom setting to be able to discuss all of this with the children, so with the teachers, but we don't have that. Have the administration and the teachers been able to still have those conversations virtually, or is the technical divide just too large for this?
Advantage of everything. Our particularly in grades 7 through 12, we have infused in our English and social studies curriculum media literacy. And so these were opportunities for us to look at real life news and to infuse that in our curriculum. We are virtual. We do online learning. And so we were able to change our curriculum somewhat to attend to these facts, to speak about, to look at what happened in Minnesota, to explore how does someone sit on someone's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds? What inhumanity? And how have other things throughout history happened with everyone standing around? What is it to be a bystander? And what is it to be an upstander? We have infused that in our curriculum for the younger children as well. You know, when you're being bullied, what do you do? Do you see other people being bullied? What do you do? And so those are all lessons, opportunities that we take to teach our children what's right and wrong.
We have members of law enforcement on this panel. We also have an activist on this panel. Obviously, you bring in guests from time to time in the classroom. Is there maybe a program that could be in the works where you bring everyone together to be able to speak to the students?
Well, we do have that opportunity. I've had Patrick Ryder he's a welcome sight in our district. We've done work with vaping and other things that he's been very integral. We do have opportunities. We work with Erase Racism, Elaine Gross, and our children, our students are involved in that. Every one of our schools are No Place for Hate schools. That is in collaboration with the ADL. And so those conversations take place, even in a virtual world, we still continue those conversations.
Dan, are you heartened to hear that those conversations are happening right now in virtual classrooms?
Absolutely. I mean, it's desperately needed. And we've had these conversations, again, as an organization. We've been proactively, and before this, working alongside Sheriff Toulon and Suffolk Police Commissioner Geraldine Hart and Deputy Police Commissioner Risco Lewis. So these are things that are in place, and we're doing that now. It needs to continue to happen. But at the same time, we have to make sure that, again, it's not just reforms, it's drastic changes to how we look at the underlying problems with racism and the divides, not only Long Island, but in America, because it's not just police reforms that's the problem with all this.
Legislator Richberg, we've seen action at the federal level now at the president's executive order, state level as well. Do you think that the county has a role to play here in terms of change, or does that really come from the top?
I think we all have to have a seat at the table. If we don't have a seat at the table, first of all, time is going to pass us by. And as Commissioner Ryder had said, these young people are expecting change, and Dan has said the same thing. I think what's important is that we take the right step and we move forward and we have those conversations with the community. I think, we need to be looking at, our bias laws. We need to be looking at our human rights task forces. We need to be looking at our housing reform, social services. We need to be looking at, and just how we deliver services in general, because it's not just, county government's job is to serve the public. And we need to make sure we're serving them in the correct way, but also, making sure that we are taking into account every person that we come in contact with, whether you're gay, lesbian, straight, transgender, or, gender neutral. We need to make sure we're open to you, Black or white, Hispanic, or what have you, to make sure that you are being taken care of by your government, because we serve you.
Noel, traditionally, police unions are very powerful politically. What role do you believe the Suffolk PBA will have here in terms of looking at some of these potential reforms and either endorsing them or calling them out as insufficient or inappropriate?
Listen, we've always been very active with the community, the Suffolk County PBA, with all of our communities, whether it be in Farmingville, sponsoring and part of the Play for Peace with the community there, whether it be a painting out graffiti in Brentwood and Bayshore. There's a host of things we do all the time throughout our community. But I'm happy to hear what Dr. Lewis said about a teaching moment and having, the children be able to be educated as to what's going on. And I agree 100% that what we saw in Minneapolis was unacceptable. But it's also unacceptable that 89 police officers were killed in the line of duty last year. And nobody speaks about that. It's unacceptable that we had last year alone, there were 8 African-American police officers killed. And nobody seemed upset about that. And there was no protest, there were no riots. And we need to respect all life, all human beings. They sacrificed for their community. I'm not saying anything that happened. There's not a person that I have met or spoken to that has justified anything that happened in Minneapolis. It was disgraceful. It tarnished our profession. And it was a shame that we all get labeled in that same way, because that individual did not deserve to have that position of authority from day one. Whatever reason, he got through the cracks and they had that incident happen. And it is a teaching moment, but we should not negate everything else that goes on. And let's not negate all the good officers, because while we're telling the story about this bad police officer who did this bad thing, let's remind our youth so they're not afraid, as Dan said, that these young kids are scared of the police. That's an education issue with the parents, with the schools, everyone. think about all of the millions of contacts a year that law enforcement has with the community and all of the lives that are saved. Let's not forget to remind them about that. Are there bad situations? Yes. Are there a lot more, hundreds of thousands of more good experiences where someone is saved and helped and a good deed is done? Let's not forget to tell them that, because if you're ever going to bridge the gap, it's not going to be by vilifying and pointing fingers and finding fault. It's going to be by finding consensus and resolution to our differences. We have to do it the right way. That's the most important thing.
Okay, and one last question from one of our viewers. The question is about training, Commissioner Ryder. We only have a couple of minutes left, but they're asking just what kind of training do officers get in terms of self-defense in the academy, and then does it continue after they graduate and actually are out in the field?
So the state requires so many hours of training, and a lot of that training is about self-defense, about the use of force. In Nassau County Police Academy, we go above and beyond what the state requirements are, and we teach constantly de-escalation. So we're trying to bring it down, ratchet it back, similar to what we're out there when we're walking with the protesters now. We're trying to de-escalate it, trying to make some engagements with some of those that will speak with us. So keeping the calm in the crowd. We constantly teach it. We then bring them back and we go back and we train again on use of force when you go back to the range, about when we teach again on the use of the taser, again, a piece of that de-escalation process. But the greatest gift that we have and the greatest tool that we have is our mouth. And we spend time learning about diversity, learning about different cultures that we should now learn to accept, understand, communicate, and then bring it back down, de-escalate that situation.
Okay, well, we are going to have to leave it there for tonight. Hopefully next time we can do this in person, but for now, I thank you all for being here. It's an important conversation, and it is one that hopefully we can continue in the future. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you, Rich.
All right, this has been a News 12 Facebook Live special, Unrest in America, a community conversation. Thank you all for watching and submitting your questions and comments as well. I'm Rich Barrabi. Thanks for being there. Have a good night.